It really is it's an honor for me to introduce Joshua Dickson. He was the National Faith Engagement Director for the Biden-Harris campaign. Biden's message to the nation as a candidate and now as president has really had deep faith roots. I mean, basically, like in the inaugural address, basically what he was saying is, Americans, we've got to work together. And if somebody needs help, we got to help them out. I mean, so it's sort of like the golden rule for for a country in crisis. And the golden rule is in all the great religions. And so Joshua has played a major role in pushing out the Biden-Harris message into all the diverse faith communities and ethical communities networks in the United States. The effectiveness of the Biden campaign, certainly compared, say, compared to prior Democratic campaigns, it was much more effective, and that really did help to win the election. And then, Josh, I've said it to you, and I think to the students too, that I think in the president's very early days in office, we have seen just a remarkable shift of U.S. public policy through executive actions and his legislative proposals. Now, we have seen a really remarkable shift in favor of economic justice, racial justice, what's good for poor and near poor people. Josh grew up in a loving, conservative, evangelical family. As a young man, he was moved, presumably by his faith, to work on the south side of Chicago. And that experience as a teacher and an organizer on the south side of Chicago really changed the direction. He felt a call to move in the direction of a life focused on racial and economic justice. He has, I have experienced that he has tremendous energy for fun. When I read up on him, really, I forgot. What he does for fun is he goes out and runs 50 or 100 miles for fun. And then, but he brings that energy into his work on the intersection between faith and politics. And Josh, we very much look forward to hearing what you're thinking and doing in your new position. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much, David. I really appreciate you all having me. And just, I hope that all of your students know how lucky they are to have someone who's so seasoned and has been a part of moving things in our country in the direction of justice for such a long time. So I hope you all know that David is a real treasure, and it was an honor for me to have the chance to work with him in a number of ways over the past several months. And just glad to be here with you all today. I am a public policy school graduate myself, and I have not gone to seminary, but have been around seminary a lot my entire life, and I've worked a bunch with Union Theological Seminary and folks there on a number of efforts over the years. Yeah, just appreciate y'all being here. I wish it could be in person. I was telling David earlier this morning, it would be nice to be in Berkeley, California this time of the year. I'm actually not in Washington, D.C. right now. I'm in Denver, Colorado. And while it's mountainous, it's cold. I will say, just for the record, I'm here in my unofficial personal capacity. But I can speak to a lot of these different things. And a number of these things, especially on the second part, are all public things that I'll be speaking to. But a couple other pieces for me, I did my master's thesis on ways in which the Democratic Party could make more inroads with people of faith, and then have been involved in this work a bit for the last close to the last decade or so. Helped the Young Democrats of America start their first ever faith and values program back in 2011, and then worked on the Obama-Biden campaign out of the DNC and then Ohio in 2012, and have just kind of really stayed connected into the political work. And have found it really interesting and fascinating. So without further ado, I'm gonna jump into that. And what I wanted to do is start off with some quick background about the landscape when it comes to faith and politics. And some of this will not be new to anybody, but I think it's helpful grounding even for me as I kind of share some of this information. In our country, roughly 74% of people identify with a religious background. It kind of depends on which new survey you look at, but it's somewhere between 70%, 75%, and 72% of people say faith is important to their lives. So regardless of whether we are people of faith or not, it's clearly something that is still a real factor for many folks, how they identify, where their values come from, how they associate with different things, especially in the political space. I think it's also interesting to look at, and I'm just gonna try to share my screen for a second here. Here you can kind of see like a quick snapshot, not including 2020, but going back to 2000, a little bit about the ways in which different faith demographics broke down. And I think what's interesting is to see swings here and to see the ways in which, look at the Catholic vote, for example. In 2000, it went a little bit more towards Gore. In 2004, it swung away back towards Bush, was relatively decisive in his victory. In 2008, it swung back to Obama. It's more decisive in his victory. Then it swung, Obama maintained a bit, lost some on the margins. He also lost, his victory wasn't as decisive in 2012. It was still pretty decisive, but not as resounding as his 2008 victory. And then it dropped a bit for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I'll get to 2020 shortly. But you can kind of see in here some other different faiths, and as you think about just the ways in which these swings happen, the ways in which voters who affiliate with these backgrounds are a part of key voting blocks, especially in key states, given that we live in the United States with the electoral college as it is. It really underscores the idea that politics is very much a margins game. It's very much about how are you winning key voters on the margins, either maintaining your share of the vote on the margin or persuading more people on the margin. And it's really this combination of both persuasion and mobilization. So you want to turn out your base, you want to persuade as many people as possible. And I think the angle of looking at how do you persuade voters who are motivated by faith is a really fascinating one for me, and I've done a lot of reading on it. What's interesting about like some of the context for this election is there were some big changes between 2016 and 2018, and I think folks, one of the huge storylines, of course, in 2016 was white evangelical turnout for Trump, and even seeing his share of the Catholic vote was pretty significant, and his share of a number of other votes. But in 2018, in the midterms, Democrats' national share of the vote increased 5 percentage points among Catholics, 6 percentage points among evangelicals, 3 percentage points amongst Protestants and other Christians, 8 percentage points amongst Jewish voters, and 4 percentage points amongst Muslims. Whereas from 2012 to 2014, Democrats' share of the vote decreased amongst each of those groups, a trend which continued in 2016, as you just saw from that table, aside from Jewish voters. So these are interesting trend lines to follow, especially as you're preparing for a presidential campaign and thinking about where are our opportunities. I'm going to show my screen again real quickly and just sort of paint a little bit more of a picture of the environment we were walking into in 2020. So, when we really started to ramp up a lot of this work, I had been supporting the work of President Biden for a while, actually going back to before he entered into the primary. His campaign manager was my former boss in the Obama campaign in 2012. So we've been talking about things for a while. That said, I didn't come on full time on the campaign until later on, and really post primary. So, when I was looking at this in June, July, as I was preparing to start this job, trying to look at the current environment, and obviously a lot of things have been happening. You had COVID hit our country and really spread massively. You had the murder of George Floyd and uprisings around racial justice. You saw a lot of different contextual factors, economic factors, other things like that. And so, what we're trying to do is paint a picture of like, what's the environment that we're entering into, and how can that inform where our opportunities are? I'm not going to go in detail about all these things, but you can see, some of these things are what we look at, right? So, one is, we saw that most religious Americans did not view Trump's handling of the response to George Floyd murder positively. Not surprising, but it is interesting, especially to look at Trump's response, or Trump's handling of the response to George Floyd's murder amongst some of his base voters, right? And what does that say to us? It says, hey, like, folks really aren't, they're not all just totally latched onto him. There are, even if it's 2, 3, 4 percentage points worth of persuadables, it tells us just some more information about them. And so this is all really, really helpful. We saw confidence in Trump's handling of COVID-19 dropped, and dissatisfaction with it increased among several sizable religious groups between March and May of 2020, including folks that were key to his base. Saw that his favorability ratings among several religious groups had dropped by double digits between March and May of 2020, obviously correlated with a lot of things happening in the country. We saw that white Christians, who account for a lot of his base, that live in counties more affected by COVID-19, were less likely to view him favorably than those living in less affected counties. We saw a sizable proportion of Americans say that their faith had grown stronger during COVID-19, which is just an interesting data point for us to be thinking about in terms of messaging that could resonate. And then there's just other things too in the environment, where we saw, as of June 2020, that a large percentage of his base didn't view him as religious, and that there were some implications around that for how we could appeal in terms of values messaging. I share these not for you all to look at the ins and outs of them. This is all publicly available information, but more so to give a sense of like some of the things that we look at and some of the trend lines that were helpful for us as we kind of looked through and thought about, hey, like, where are our big opportunities? And for us, obviously at the national level, it's helpful to see these different, to try to make gains on the margins, but really at the state level, when you're talking about presidential elections in the US, is where it's significant. And so I want to share this table too, because it gives you a little bit of a snapshot as well of some of the states that I was thinking about and looking at. So you can see in the left-hand column, the name of the state, as well as Trump's margin of victory in 2016, percentage-wise, and then raw vote-wise, which gave us an idea of like, hey, all things held equal, if we could make some slight shifts, how might that play out? If you can shift the Catholic vote by 5 percentage points, if you can have 5% higher voter turnout amongst Black Protestant voters, and just know too, and I have this included up here, is that because of exit poll data, because of limitations in exit poll data, we just don't have data for as many groups as we would like. So there are a lot of groups in here that I would like to have more information about, but usually we just work off of what we have. And so we definitely have limitations here. So when there are groups not represented, it's just because we don't have state-specific snapshots based on exit poll sample sizes that are publicly available. But you can just see here again, you can see these states and the margin of victory from last time. Then you can see, according to polling, the percent who say that religion is somewhat or very important in their life, which gives us, again, just a little bit of an idea of the landscape. And then just opportunities that we're looking at. And you can just kind of see here, if we use Michigan as an example, we got 39% of the Catholic vote in 2016. Which was down from 44%. If you're talking about a state where Catholics make up 1.8 million people, that's a sizable shift in terms of impacting the outcome in Michigan. And same thing with a number of these other constituencies. And even in Michigan, I had talked to a lot of my friends on the ground who are, who work across the state, and who one of my friends is a state rep, and they actually pointed out this sizable population of Chaldean and Iraqi Christians that had swung really heavily for Trump, but that had had some really negative experiences with Trump around immigration issues and deportations and whatnot. And, so we wanted to hear from them and hear a little bit about how we could work together and show that, Joe Biden would be a lot better for their community in a number of ways, including refugees who are coming in. So again, this is just a little snapshot to give an idea of some of the things that we're thinking through when we look at the overall context and when we look at how to determine where to lean in, because you always have limited time and resources, and you want to go where the bang for the buck is going to be the highest. So on that note, some of our major strategic considerations, aside from, again, the idea that this is a margins game and that you need to know who you're trying to mobilize and who you're trying to persuade. And actually, if I would have scrolled down there a little bit more, you would see in some states in 2016, we actually saw really depressed, we saw that Black Protestant voter turnout was depressed in places like Wisconsin and a couple other states where it was much lower than it had been in 2012. And that actually accounted for a lot of Trump's margin of victory, is just folks who didn't end up voting. And so we're always trying to think about this combination of mobilization and persuasion. We're also thinking about winning the narrative and how we can really speak with the language of values and emotions when it comes to connecting with voters in general, but faith-motivated voters in particular. There's a book called The Political Brain, which is really fascinating, and some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have read it. It really talks about the psychology of how people make their choices in the voting booth, how they form and craft their political views and things like that, and just what appeals to them. And it speaks a lot about the language of values and emotions, and how when you're trying to run campaigns and win people over either to your candidate or to your cause, it's really effective to appeal from a value standpoint. And I know David knows this all too well because this has been the work he's been doing his entire life. I know that you all probably, this resonates a lot. It resonated a lot with me, but it was really helpful for me when I was in grad school to see the actual science behind it and how much it impacts things. And then thereafter to watch it play out in different political contests and other stuff like that. But that's really, really important. And just a couple other things on strategic considerations. You have to make people know they matter to you. And I think if you don't do that, people can feel really turned off by you and actually want to tell their friends not to support you. That's a very big thing, and I'll get to that in a little bit when it comes to this space. And then building trust through trusted messengers, and this is such a key thing. Like me as one person, I am a straight white progressive evangelical male who was born to a middle income family in upstate New York. My perspective is and will always be limited because of different identifiers, different experiences, things like that. I will not be able to speak to every single constituency in every group in the same way that a credible voice from their community will be able to. And so really thinking about how to build support and how to build partnerships and collaborations with folks who can be trusted messengers to communities and who can really validate the work that you're trying to do and be spokespeople for the cause on the whole. So those are some major strategic considerations from my end. I would say, when it comes to goals on the whole, our big target was to increase our margins with key constituencies in our focus states by building a historically broad, robust, and inclusive coalition of faith-motivated voters. And I think that was one of the pieces for us. We really wanted to live into the values of our candidates, and stressing diversity and inclusion was a huge part of that. And so from the get-go, that was a big piece of how we operated, and I'll touch on how we did that in just a second. But we really entered into, once we started the campaign and got up and moving, we really entered into our work with this operating philosophy where that was kind of anchored in three main points. And we talked about this with reporters all the time, but it was really important for us to get this out there. That point one is that people of faith must feel valued and respected by our campaign. That was something that we had heard that folks hadn't always felt from Democratic campaigns, and that we knew was really, really important if we were going to have try to have a foothold and win over new voters, and even to mobilize our base. Two, we knew that we had to ask people of faith to vote for us. And Amy Sullivan wrote this great book called The Party Faithful. And in the book, she does the exhaustive research on the ways in which Democrats have worked to engage faith-motivated voters, and this thing called the God gap, which is how people of faith perceive the Democrats as being much less friendly towards religion. It's a perception thing. And one of Amy's kind of big points is too often Democrats don't even ask people of faith for their votes. And so for us, one of the core points of our operating philosophy was we're going to ask people for their votes. And then third was we wanted to give people a reason to vote for us rather than just to vote against our opposition. So those things really anchored our work. And then we had several strategic pillars that kind of guided the actual things that we did. On the whole, the issue that rose to the top most consistently was addressing systemic racism, especially in the wake of George Floyd. But some of that research that we did, these conversations all really helped with that. And so our argument was that this was the real religious issue of the election for the voters that we were really trying to persuade, where it would really, really make a difference. We also worked to get our message out through a very aggressive press engagement strategy, through paid media, through interviews that our team did and that other surrogates did, through op-eds, through endorsements, through videos from our candidates, through videos from surrogates like President Obama, and more. So the narrative piece was a really, really big focus for us, especially during COVID, especially during this strange campaign where everyone is home and everyone's on screens all the time. The second big piece was like, we wanted anyone, anywhere who wanted to be a part of our work to have ongoing opportunities to do that. We hosted different types of events. We had different types of coalitions, and David saw this firsthand.
Yeah.
We had evangelicals for Biden. We had LGBTQ believers for Biden. We had AAPI Christians for Biden. We had Hindu Americans for Biden, Jewish Americans for Biden, Muslim Americans for Biden, Sikh Americans for Biden, progressive believers for Biden. Just this, basically, all of the different identities and different individuals we worked with across the board, we just worked with them to ensure that they felt represented and included. And so we hosted events for all these different groups: young believers for Biden, women believers for Biden. We hosted every single group that I mentioned and more. We hosted events with, and some of them multiple. Because we really wanted to show, again, the inclusivity of this campaign and the way in which our work really was focused on engaging this broad, diverse group. We also provided folks with regular opportunities to hear from key speakers and to take action with the campaign. That was a big thing. We're always pushing, here's how you can get involved, here's how you can phone bank, here's how you can text bank, here's how you can do other things that are helping get the message out. We focused on sharing articles and social media that other people could share as well. We hosted gospel concerts. I think we did 7 gospel concerts across multiple different weekends. Just a different type of medium, especially during COVID, where so many folks are attending services from home. We worked with a bunch of different artists on that, and surrogates. We provided people with the opportunity to virtually deploy to states and basically go and be a part of our Florida team, go and be a part of our Michigan team, and you can do it from home. And they would work with our teams there, and more. So we basically wanted anyone who was looking to be a part of this work, we wanted them to have ways to take action and to actively be involved in this. Third is we did nonpartisan voter registration and turnout. That was a big thing. We worked with a lot of different congregations on that, and just really, especially with all of the different threats to voters all around the country, particularly voters of color and marginalized communities from our opposition. We really wanted to make sure that folks had the chance to do that and to partner with us this way for 501c3s. we had a big focus, number 4, on leader engagement and mobilization. So I mentioned we hosted listening sessions. We had different advisory groups. So for those coalitions that I mentioned, we had advisory groups, kitchen cabinet groups we met with regularly to hear from, to work with, to collaborate with on different initiatives, different events, things like that. We really stressed endorsements, and we weren't just trying to go for some big name endorsements that would just really splash and all that. We were focused on getting as many endorsements as possible, and this is a thing that you don't usually get from faith leaders, but in this campaign, given the nature of it, we just figured, hey, let's go out and ask. And once we started asking, more and more folks came out of the woodwork, and were like, yeah, I want to take a moral stand. This election it's not about politics for me. It's not about partisanship. It's about principle. And so, for us, we really stressed that, and it resulted in some great press coverage as we rolled those out, because we achieved a historic number. We also worked with folks to get op-eds out there. We provided leaders with speaking opportunities, media appearances, and just ways to amplify their message and their support for our ticket. We also highlighted common good policies that we felt were in strong contrast to the current administration, like racial equity, fighting poverty, our stances on immigration and refugees, our approach to COVID-19, healthcare, climate, and more. And then we very much stressed on the next point, integration of our work across the campaign. So we worked with the paid media team to do a 7-figure ad buy that was focused on key faith communities in swing states. We worked with the communications team on a number of different things that they were doing. We worked with the speechwriting team to insert things when different, whether it was our one of our candidates or another key surrogate was going to be delivering a message to a particular community. You saw one of those speeches in the Poor People's Campaign address that President Biden did. We worked with our digital team to get content out there and to ensure that we were amplifying our values messaging. We worked across the national coalitions team that I worked on. So I worked with all of my other colleagues. I worked with our women's outreach director, worked with our Latinx outreach director, worked with our AAPI outreach director, worked with our Black Americans outreach director, worked with our LGBTQ outreach director, and everyone. We did events together and really just tried to show the intersectionality of our work. We worked with our policy team, we worked with our field team, and more. And then the final piece on this is we worked with all of our swing states, all of our battleground states, to try to replicate this programming at the state level. So I had regular weekly or more frequently touch points with folks from 15 different swing states who we were working with, providing guidance to and supporting. So that's kind of a rundown. What were the results? At the end of the day, we hosted 112 national events in 3 months with more than 3 million attendees, including 7 virtual gospel concerts. We secured more than 2,500 faith leader endorsements, a record number for a Democratic presidential campaign. We secured 130 plus earned media stories, including in the New York Times, CNN, NPR, Washington Post, Christianity Today, Associated Press, and we had op-eds that were written about their own personal faith journeys from both of our candidates. So we had an op-ed from President Biden, which I think you all read in Christian Post, and then we had an op-ed from Vice President Harris in Deseret News in the lead up to the vice presidential debate. We also ran a 7-figure, as I mentioned before, ran a 7-figure faith ad budget, the highest of any Democratic presidential campaign in modern history. And we, on the number side, we increased the national share of the Catholic vote by 6 points, and the Catholic vote accounted for roughly 22 to 25% of the electorate. We saw a 12-point gain amongst white Catholics. We saw our share of the evangelical vote go up. It kind of depends on which exit polls, but anywhere from a few points, which is kind of what our target was, all the way up to 7 points. And then when you look at the state level, which is really what matters the most, we saw our share of the evangelical vote in Michigan double, which way more than accounted for the margin of victory. We saw our share of the evangelical vote in Georgia triple, which the evangelical vote accounts for about a third of the electorate there. And if you recall, it was a pretty close race there. We saw a 9-point gain amongst Latter-day Saint voters in Arizona. We did a whole bunch of Latter-day Saint engagement as well, where Latter-day Saints make up about 5% of the electorate, and those results accounted for raw vote gains more than the margin of victory in each of those states. I do wish I had more exit poll data on like specific religious snapshots, because we just don't have it for a lot of groups. And that's the unfortunate thing, is like they'll pull them for some of the larger groups, but in general, we just don't get a lot of it. That's the only reason why I'm referring to these specific groups and not to others. It's just because we don't have the information. But clearly, we saw a big impact in our work. I was just going to read several headlines from some different articles that came out of the campaign. In Politico wrote an article titled "How Biden Swung the Religious Vote," and they said Trump's team thought religious-minded voters would save him in key states. They now appear to have turned away just enough for him to lose. New York Times, an article titled "The Faithful Voters Who Helped Put Biden Over the Top." And the author wrote, Joe Biden succeeded in his mission to end Donald Trump's presidency, and he did so in part because of the wise, persistent, and strategic way his campaign related to faith. This was not inevitable. And then Newsweek ran an article that the headline says it all: evangelicals in Midwest who ditched Trump cost him the election, early data suggests. I told you I geek out on this stuff and get really into it. Before I even started on the campaign, before my job description was even up, I wrote like a 15-page heavily detailed memo that I spent like 40 hours on, and it was fun. So I get really into this stuff, so I can talk too much. For me, the day I decided I was going to work on the 2012 campaign, I didn't know what my job was going to be. I had no idea how I was going to get connected in, but I was at an event at the Kennedy School, and Eric Cantor, who some of you all remember, he was the majority leader in the House at this time. So he was number 2 to John Boehner. He came and spoke. And I remember someone asked him about the Paul Ryan budget cuts. And they were like, how could you support something like this that has such a detrimental impact on the poor and vulnerable at home and abroad? And he said, trade-offs. You got to make trade-offs. And I was like, that right there is what's at stake, is that perspective. And that just goes against so much of what I personally stand for. And I see that when it comes to how folks are going to actually legislate and work to provide more opportunity for the most vulnerable, and to try to address the historic inequities that exist in our country, I just saw such a contrast there. And so when I joined the campaign, that was a lot of what we talked about, was that values contrast. So we should talk a lot about poverty. And David can speak so much to this because he was working on this congressional hunger fast and on all these different things opposing the Ryan budget cuts. But that was a big frame for us. I remember when I went around Ohio and had surrogates come in, usually I would go like pick someone up from the airport, whether it was like Vicki Kennedy or Senator Dick Durbin or someone else. And, they'd have their talking points from their team, but they'd say, what do you think I should talk about? As we're like driving to an event. And I always said, like, you should talk about the contrast in how the President Obama's approach to caring for the poor and vulnerable is just so much more aligned with the values of people of faith than what we see from the things that Romney Ryan support. So I think like it's very much adjusting your strategy for the context.
You have a unique perspective on American faith communities. I don't think, is there any other institution that relates to this whole all these different networks of people, at least a lot of them, find their way to the White House, and also at least the Obama White House and now the Biden White House, seek them out. They're inviting in different faith communities, and is there any other institution in the country that brings together all the, when Obama had kind of faith leaders together, I mean, sometimes he'd do a Muslim event and a Christian event, and but sometimes he'd bring people together, and I was struck, my God, there are all these people. I didn't even know there were these people. I just think your perspective is unique, but am I wrong? Are there other institutions that relate to everybody the way the White House faith-based office does?
I mean, I think that it's definitely a unique perch and provides unique convening power. I think other organizations have their own unique convening power, and other institutions do too. But ours is unique in and of itself as well. Again, just being a place where we do work to represent all Americans and people of all beliefs and backgrounds, including the non-religious. And that's been a big piece. And even like on the campaign, we had humanists for Biden. I worked closely with the humanist community as they were getting out there, and
well, it's faith-based and neighborhood partnerships.
And now
I didn't like to name it years ago, but it's a brilliant name because it also has neighborhood, because people live in neighborhoods, so it doesn't sound it doesn't sound like it's all just national manipulation. It's connecting to people where they are. One other thing I'm struck by just recently, because of this course, is that presidents can influence American religion. I've always thought about it the other way, that churches were trying to influence politicians. But what really struck me was the one thing we read, that an article by Robert Putnam at Harvard talked about how abortion and gay marriage became so prominent. Putnam also says that more people hear about poverty and hunger from the pulpit than about abortion and gay marriage. So how did it happen that those two issues just became that a lot of religious people think those are the two issues that God cares about? And he attributes it to the Bush campaign, the George W. Bush campaign in 2014, that they advertised, we are the party that's going to fight abortion, oppose abortion and gay marriage, and with a picture of a little church on a hill, so we are the religious party. And a lot of people bought it, not just to vote for him, but it also changed how they think, what they think in fact is religious. And I think, Trump has done a lot of damage to religion in America. And I think Biden's having a salutary effect. He's, maybe partly the opposite of talking about poverty and race. And he does such a beautiful job of doing it in a non-geeky way, just talking about helping out people who need help when we need help, helping each other.
Well, and he's authentic. I think that's the thing, and we talked about that a lot during the campaign. Is like he's pretty authentic to who he is and what his values are, and he's someone who, he's gonna care about you and want to know what's happening with your family, whether you're Catholic like he is, or whether you're Jewish, or whether you go to an AME church or you have no faith at all. He has so many relationships. He cares about people deeply, and he, really, he empathizes and he seeks to connect, and that's been such a hallmark part of who he is.
It's really true.
He goes to mass.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many times, I don't know how long it'll be until he has gone to religious services more than the past 4 or 5 presidents combined in terms of like showing it. But for him, he just basically, he goes every week, and sometimes he goes multiple times a week. I still think that he's gone more times than the weeks he's been president.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure, because he went on Inauguration Day. He's gone every Saturday or Sunday. He was at Camp David one week, and I don't know if he went then, but he went during Ash Wednesday too. So, but I mean, but it's because it's not because he's trying to show off. He doesn't go and talk about it in the same way that other people do. It's just that's who he is. And he did that in the campaign, and he'll continue to do that. It's a really fascinating case study, and will be interesting to see, how this plays out over time. But yeah, I think his authenticity that he brings to it really, speaks volumes. I was on a call earlier today where someone said, as faith leaders, this is our time to stand up and show what we really are about, what our values truly are. When it comes to all the things this legislation does around combating child poverty, around increasing wages and closing the wealth gap for historically disadvantaged communities, for communities of color, what this does for frontline workers, what this does for to work on closing gaps in related to learning loss and things along those lines, what this does around expanding healthcare access, access to capital for small business owners, and more. So we're right at the hour. I know that David's got to turn it over, but hopefully that was just a good snapshot of where we are today, how the White House is orienting towards this, and just where the potential lies. And all that to say, I think it's still up to us to actualize that. So that's the task at hand, and I'll turn it back to David.